50 million individual DNA profiles are currently held within private databases, archives maintained by two of the world's most prominent consumer genetics companies. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the very same agency that solved crimes from the 1970s, cases that went cold long before many of us were born, possesses the legal authority to serve warrants on these companies and demand access. This access extends far beyond names and addresses, reaching to the DNA itself, the genetic fingerprints that create a map of a person's complete biological identity. The Golden State Killer was a predator who eluded authorities for more than 40 years. He was responsible for the murders of at least 13 people and committed over 50 vicious sexual assaults. His shadow fell across two distinct regions of California, spanning two separate decades, and for 40 years law enforcement possessed the physical evidence. They held DNA from the crime scenes, but it led them nowhere because the genetic profile did not match anyone in any official database, until genetic genealogy changed the entire landscape. Investigators submitted the crime scene DNA into a public genealogical database, where they uncovered partial matches with distant relatives, meticulously constructed a family tree, and ultimately zeroed in on a retired police officer named Joseph James D'Angelo. He was taken into custody in 2018. He would later plead guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder. He died in prison in 2024. This was a case once considered permanently unsolvable, yet this technology brought it to a definitive close. Now, advance this timeline to 2026, to Tucson, Arizona, and to the unsettling disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman. She is the mother of a major television personality, missing since February, with DNA evidence recovered from inside her home and the FBI now deeply involved in the investigation. The question that now hangs over this entire community is why, with 50 million profiles in databases and the full resources of the FBI armed with an established legal framework, do investigators still not have a name? CeCe Moore has just answered that very question, and her explanation is not what most people would have ever expected. Before we proceed, a crucial point of order is necessary. As we understand this, community rejects analysis that outpaces verified facts. Everything that follows is meticulously sourced. CeCe Moore provided her statements on the record to TMZ. The scientific specifics she articulated are entirely consistent with and can be verified against the established body of literature in forensic genomics. At any point where we transition to analytical inference, we will state it explicitly. Every piece of information presented here as fact is supported by a source. Every theory is identified as a theory. Any claim from a single source is attributed directly to that source. This has been our standard of operation from our very first report, and it is the standard we uphold today. We are covering an active federal investigation. What you are about to hear is a combination of sourced, verified reporting, and clearly labeled analysis. It is not a legal accusation. Let us examine how genetic genealogy functions. Before delving into the specifics of what CeCe Moore revealed and its profound implications for the Guthrie investigation, it is essential to grasp the fundamentals of this technology, because the obstacle she identified can only be comprehended with an understanding of what genetic genealogy truly requires. And for those who have followed this reporting from its inception, you are aware that we do not skim over the technical details when those details are the very heart of the story. In this case, they are the entire story. The history of DNA evidence within criminal justice is a narrative of progression and constraint, of increasingly powerful tools encountering increasingly specific limitations. With each technological leap, the boundaries of the possible were redrawn, and simultaneously, new obstacles emerged for investigators to navigate. We now find ourselves at precisely such an inflection point, right now, within this very investigation. The conflict arises from the starkly different demands that genetic genealogy places on a DNA sample compared to the requirements of traditional forensic analysis. This distinction is of monumental importance, and it is the very reason CeCe Moore articulated it with such care. Many who follow true crime are familiar with CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. When a forensic lab handles evidence from a crime scene, they generate what is known as an STR profile, which stands for Short Tandem Repeat Profile. This profile maps a precise set of genetic markers, and that resulting signature is uploaded into CODIS. The system then cross-references the sample against a database of profiles belonging to individuals convicted of crimes or arrested in jurisdictions that mandate DNA collection. CODIS is an undeniably powerful tool, responsible for millions of investigative leads since its creation in the 1990s. Yet, it operates under one fundamental limitation. If the person who committed a crime has never been inside the criminal justice system, never been arrested, never been convicted, and has never had their DNA collected by a law enforcement agency, CODIS has absolutely nothing to match against. To the system, that person is a ghost. It doesn't matter how pristine the sample is. If they are not already in the system, they are invisible. Genetic genealogy solved this problem by reframing the question entirely. Instead of asking if crime scene DNA directly matches a known offender, genetic genealogy poses a fundamentally different inquiry. Does this DNA share a partial match with anyone related to the person who left it behind? The power of this approach lies in heredity, because you share significant portions of your genetic code with your parents and your siblings, with your children, your cousins, your second cousins, and even with relatives as distant as your third and fourth cousins. A vast collection of individuals, strangers to one another, who share distant genetic threads with a suspect, can be transformed into a direct map to their front door. Yet, there is a crucial distinction. This powerful technique, genetic genealogy, operates on a completely different plane. It has no use for conventional STR profiles. It demands a unique form of genetic information. This information is known as a SNP profile. SNP is the acronym for single nucleotide polymorphism, pronounced simply as SNP. To create a SNP profile, scientists must meticulously examine hundreds of thousands of distinct locations scattered across an individual's complete genetic blueprint. These are the precise points in our DNA where human beings most frequently differ from each other, often by just a single genetic letter. This is the very same kind of genetic profile that companies like Ancestry and 23andMe produce after you send them a vial of your saliva. It serves as the engine behind their popular ethnicity reports and the feature that connects you with long-lost relatives. For investigators to leverage these genealogical databases, they first require a SNP profile derived from the DNA left at a crime scene. That profile is then uploaded into the system. The system then scans for partial matches individuals whose genetic makeup shares enough in common with the unknown sample to indicate a familial connection. Using these partial matches as starting points, a highly skilled genetic genealogist meticulously constructs family trees, tracing ancestral lines back through time. The process culminates in the identification of the very person whose DNA was recovered from the scene. This is the method. It is proven. It has closed hundreds of cases. And this is precisely the technique being employed at this very moment in the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's death. However, a significant obstacle stands in the way, and that obstacle is quite specific, tied directly to Cece Moore and her unique qualifications. Moore is not some minor character in this narrative. In many respects, she is the very architect of this entire scientific field. Moore holds the title of Chief Genetic Genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the forensic genomics firm that first introduced this technology to the world of law enforcement. Prior to her work with Parabon, she dedicated years as an independent genealogist, immersing herself in the dawn of consumer DNA testing to explore the hidden potential of these databases for uncovering family connections. She grasped, long before nearly anyone in the investigative community, that the surge in consumer genetics was creating something new. The fact that millions of everyday citizens were willingly sharing their genetic data to explore their heritage had inadvertently forged a revolutionary tool for criminal investigation. She initiated collaborations with police agencies to apply these databases to unsolved cases, and her work in that arena has been relentless ever since. By the moment she chose to speak with TMZ regarding the Nancy Guthrie investigation, Cece Moore had already played a personal role in resolving more than 300 criminal cases through the application of genetic genealogy. 300. This figure encompasses homicides, brutal sexual assaults, and cold cases that had languished without a single lead for decades. Her work has also given names back to the dead, identifying victims discovered without any form of identification, bringing closure to families who had endured years of uncertainty. And it includes unmasking perpetrators who were convinced their crimes would remain forever unsolved. She has presented her findings in courtrooms as an expert witness, and has instructed law enforcement departments all across the nation. Her name is attached to some of the most prominent genetic genealogy investigations ever conducted in the United States. So, when Cece Moore discusses both the potential and the boundaries of this technology, she is speaking from a place of direct, hands-on experience, not from abstract theory, academic conjecture, or information gleaned from research papers. She has been the one at the keyboard, uploading the genetic profiles, and painstakingly assembling the family trees. She has personally witnessed cases that were sealed shut for 30 or even 40 years suddenly crack wide open. Moreover, she is not a person who speaks recklessly about ongoing investigations. Therefore, when she made the decision to speak with TMZ about the particular technical hurdles within the Nancy Guthrie case, pinpointing the exact obstacles, explaining the underlying science, and even identifying the company tasked with resolving it, these were all calculated moves. She communicated precisely what she meant to communicate. Her on-the-record statement confirmed that for this case, more than 50 million consumer DNA profiles are stored in databases that can be accessed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation possesses the legal power to issue warrants to companies like Ancestry and 23andMe. She expressed a belief that warrants would likely be served on the major databases, the very ones her field is currently forbidden from utilizing. Even with more than 50 million individuals having submitted their DNA for direct-to-consumer testing, a massive roadblock exists. The three dominant companies in the industry have explicitly forbidden law enforcement from accessing their databases for these investigative purposes. Authorities possess DNA evidence recovered from the victim's home, yet a distinct technical problem is preventing that crucial evidence from being used in a database search. She identified the issue, the 50 million profiles. It is essential to grasp the sheer scale of this resource to understand what is at stake. Ancestry DNA, the genetic division of the well-known genealogy service, has amassed a collection of more than 25 million customer DNA profiles. These profiles belong to individuals who purchased a testing kit and voluntarily submitted their DNA for analysis. In exchange, they received detailed reports on their heritage and connections to potential relatives. 23andMe, prior to its recent financial struggles, had constructed a database of roughly 14 million profiles. GED-Match, the public, opt-in database famously utilized to identify the Golden State Killer, represents another key resource. It contains several million more profiles, uploaded by users from different testing services who hope to discover family connections across corporate boundaries. The cumulative total from these principal platforms is, at a minimum, a staggering 50 million profiles. In a discussion regarding the New York case, CeCe Moore explicitly cited that figure during her TMZ interview. She was not offering a casual estimate. This number represents the current magnitude of the genetic genealogy resources that are accessible to investigators through legal channels. And 50 million is far more than just an impressive statistic. For the purposes of identification, it signifies a state of functional completion. Due to the fundamental mechanics of DNA inheritance, it is not necessary to have every single person in a country cataloged in a database to identify nearly anyone. Extensive research in genetic genealogy has demonstrated that once a threshold of approximately 3 to 5% of a population has uploaded their DNA to searchable databases, it becomes theoretically possible for investigators to establish a familial link to almost any person within that population, because the intricate web of cousins, second cousins, and third cousins grows so dense that it can be used to map nearly any family tree. The population of the United States is approximately 330 million people. 50 million profiles account for roughly 15% of the population. We are profoundly beyond the threshold required for universal coverage. If the individual responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance possesses any living relatives, a parent, a sibling, an adult child, a first cousin or a second cousin who has submitted their DNA to Ancestry or 23andMe or any other major platform, a genetic trail to their identity exists. The legal precedents for warrants are established. The judicial process is in place. CeCe Moore has confirmed that the FBI possesses the requisite authority, and still, the databases have gone unsearched. The reason is a technical one, and it originates with what DNA evidence actually is at a crime scene. It explains why the FBI has not queried the databases. The widespread assumption, when people learned the FBI was involved and that DNA evidence had been secured, was that the next step was self-evident. Run the DNA, search the databases, produce a name. That assumption was profoundly incorrect. It was not incorrect because the investigators are inept, nor because the legal process has broken down, nor because the databases are off limits. It was incorrect because it was based on a false premise about the very condition of the DNA evidence itself. It presupposed that the evidence existed in a format that genetic genealogy databases could actually interpret. C.C. Moore corrected this misconception with precision. The DNA evidence retrieved from inside Nancy Guthrie's home is classified by forensic scientists as a complex mixture. And to be clear, she described it as a complex mixture, which indicates that the DNA of more than two people is present, and very likely more than two unidentified individuals. A DNA mixture is formed when biological material from multiple sources is left in the same location, on the same surface, and is then gathered as one single sample. When a surface is swabbed, be it a countertop, a door frame, or an article of clothing, and numerous individuals have touched or otherwise left biological matter on that surface, the sample collected will contain the DNA of all those people at once. Their genetic material is physically commingled on the same collection swab. Consider all the surfaces inside a home that many people touch, occupy, or inhabit throughout a lifetime. A kitchen counter, a doorknob, the arm of a chair. Any biological deposit, skin cells, saliva, or blood from anyone who has ever made contact with that surface becomes a component of what is collected. In a residential environment where family, visitors, and contractors have all left traces, a complex mixture is not an anomaly. It is frequently the standard rather than the exception. Forensic laboratories contend with DNA mixtures as a matter of routine. For two-person mixtures, a victim and a suspect, for example, there are well-established and validated analytical methods. If one contributor left a significantly greater amount of DNA than the other, scientists are often able to cleanly isolate the major contributor's profile. Even two-person mixtures with balanced contributions can, at times, be resolved with existing software. But when more than two individuals contribute to a mixture, or when the ratios between them are indistinct, or when the DNA itself is degraded, the analysis becomes dramatically more challenging. The genetic signals from each person overlap and interfere, creating a noise that current deconvolution algorithms cannot reliably separate. This is what defines a complex mixture. And these complex mixtures represent the technological barrier where current forensic science, specifically for generating a SNP profile for genetic genealogy, comes to a halt. Herein lies the critical distinction. For conventional CODIS searches using STR profiles, scientists have created mixture analysis tools that function with a reasonable degree of success, even with these complex samples. STR profiling examines a small set of genetic locations, typically 20 or less, a fact which limits how severely the different signals can interfere with one another. But SNP profiling analyzes hundreds of thousands of genetic positions simultaneously. At this immense scale, the interference between the DNA from multiple contributors becomes exponentially more difficult to resolve. An algorithm that can successfully deconstruct a two-person STR mixture might be utterly useless when applied to a three-person SNP mixture. The underlying mathematics at these different scales are simply not the same. C.C. Moore affirmed that the DNA recovered from the home falls into this precise category, a confounding jumble of multiple contributors. Furthermore, the technology to meticulously untangle those contributions into a singular, searchable SNP profile in a way that is validated, dependable, and legally sound simply does not yet exist. There is a quiet confidence that as science marches forward, we will develop superior methods for deciphering these genetic puzzles. And that, I believe, is precisely why the sheriff stated, that this could take a year, that the technology has yet to be invented. This is the problem of the complex mixture. Let us descend one level deeper into the science, for this is the absolute pivot point of this entire investigation, and it demands a thorough examination. The deconvolution problem, the challenge of separating a blended DNA sample into its individual sources, stands as one of the most formidable hurdles in all of forensic genomics. In the world of traditional forensic STR profiles, the field has made truly significant strides. Software platforms like TRM Mix and TrueAllele were conceived specifically to grapple with mixture analysis, and their findings are now accepted in courtrooms across the globe. These sophisticated instruments rely on probabilistic methodologies. They employ statistical modeling, calculating how likely various combinations of people are to create the genetic signal observed, thereby generating estimated profiles from the chaotic blend of samples. But the deconvolution of STRs operates on a scale of roughly 20 genetic locations. Imagine 20 points of data per person, with several people whose signals overlap It's a difficult but ultimately solvable puzzle with our current statistical tools. SNP profiles, however, represent a challenge of an entirely different magnitude. A standard consumer SNP array interrogates somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million individual genetic markers scattered throughout the genome. These markers are dispersed across all 23 pairs of human chromosomes, and at each location, there is a value, an A, a T, a G, or a C, in a multitude of combinations. When the DNA of several people is intertwined, every one of those hundreds of thousands of positions can become a muddled reflection of multiple individuals. Certain positions might be overwhelmingly controlled by a single contributor's signal. Others could display an equal genetic signature from 2 or even 3 people, while some may produce a signal so corrupted it cannot be clearly traced to anyone at all. To construct an algorithm that can simultaneously scan all of those positions and dependably attribute each genetic variant to its rightful owner, and to do it so precisely that the resulting profiles can be used to search genealogy databases, this remains an unsolved computational enigma. The task demands more than just immense statistical power. It requires a fundamentally novel approach to mixture modeling, far beyond what exists for STR analysis. The sheer scale of the data generates a mathematical complexity that multiplies exponentially with every additional person in the mix. C.C. Moore articulated this with chilling clarity. This is not an issue of resources. It is not an issue of processing time. It is, at its heart, an algorithm problem. The software capable of reliably deconstructing a complex SNP mixture into its constituent profiles does not yet exist in a form that the justice system can deploy. That is the stark reality of the science at this moment. Without a pristine, single-contributor SNP profile, the genetic equivalent of one person's fingerprint, perfectly isolated from the surrounding noise, the investigation hits a wall. Submitting this evidentiary DNA to platforms like Ancestry or 23andMe would yield absolutely nothing of value. You simply cannot query 50 million profiles with a contaminated, multi-person sample. The system was never engineered to handle such a scenario. Any matches it might produce would be a phantom, a statistical ghost devoid of meaning. And so, the FBI must wait, though not idly. The inquiry presses on down every other path that remains open to them. But the genetic genealogy avenue, potentially the most direct route from a crime scene to a suspect's name, is barricaded by this one specific technological void: the science of deconvolution. Yet, C.C. Moore's interview with the media did not conclude on this note of impasse. It concluded with a revelation, and this is the detail that redefines the entire case. She confirmed that a company named Othram is aggressively developing software engineered for the express purpose of solving the SNP mixture deconvolution problem. Not as a general pursuit, but as a specific target, and I have a strong feeling that this is a deconvolution software suite, perhaps from the company Othram, being created to serve law enforcement. Othram is architecting a deconvolution algorithm with the power to tear apart these complex, multi-contributor SNP mixtures and rebuild the individual profiles, with a degree of precision and reliability that would make them admissible and actionable in active criminal cases, which is a fact worth understanding in its full context. Parabon Nanolabs, Moore's own company, is one of the most advanced forensic genomics firms on the planet. If a validated, existing solution to the SNP mixture problem were available, Moore's own team would already be wielding it. The very fact that she is highlighting Othram as the entity creating this necessary tool is a profound statement on the current limitations of the field. The solution is not here yet. It is in the process of being built, and Moore confirmed this development is being fast-tracked. That word is significant. Fast-tracked does not mean hastened on a typical research schedule. This suggests the development timeline is being intentionally and forcefully condensed. The resources, the manpower, the computational power, all of it has been accelerated for circumstances precisely like those surrounding Nancy Guthrie. Pause and consider the weight of that for a moment. At this very moment, a company is actively engineering the exact piece of software that stands as the final barrier between investigators and a named person of interest in Nancy Guthrie's case. This is not some speculative project on a 5-year research horizon. C.C. Moore characterized it as fast-tracked, current, and active development, operating under a timeline that is subject to intense, aggressive management. She then went a step further. She stated officially to TMZ that should investigators manage to extract a viable single-contributor SNP profile from the DNA evidence secured at the home, whether by using Othram's software or through an alternative deconvolution method, or even by recovering additional, less complex DNA evidence, she is convinced this case will be solved within weeks, not months, not years, but weeks, potentially even days. I can say if they get a viable profile, genetic genealogy will absolutely solve it, and it will be resolved within a matter of weeks. This is because the FBI's genetic genealogy team is poised to act on it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Genetic Genealogy Unit is on standby. The databases, holding 50 million profiles, are prepared and can be accessed through established legal channels. The warrant mechanism is both in place and fully operational. The analysis of family trees, the meticulous, expert labor that CeCe Moore and her team have mastered, can commence the instant a clean profile is received. The entire pipeline, from a usable SNP profile to a named individual, is complete and ready for operation. The sole missing element is the profile itself, and the very company that might create the technology to generate it is working on it right now, fast-tracked for this exact type of case. Let us separate what is confirmed from what is not. We must be precise about what CeCe Moore's statements verify versus what they do not, because this analysis thrives on verified fact, not on wishful thinking. What is confirmed on the record by CeCe Moore's interview with TMZ is that DNA evidence was retrieved from the interior of Nancy Guthrie's home. This evidence is known to exist as a complex mixture. Deconvoluting a complex SNP mixture is something that cannot, at present, be done with any degree of reliability using existing technologies. A firm by the name of Othram is developing software to overcome that exact obstacle, and this development has been put on an accelerated track. If a usable single-contributor SNP profile can be generated, Moore believes an identification through genetic genealogy databases will emerge within weeks. Here is what Moore's statements do not confirm. We are not aware of how many contributors are present in the DNA mixture from the home. We do not know if investigators have managed to identify any of the contributors to that mixture through other forensic methods. STR analysis, as an example, might still be viable for a CODIS comparison, even if it's incapable of creating a SNP profile needed for genealogical searches. We have no knowledge of the specific release or validation timeline for Othram's software. It remains unknown whether Othram has already been formally engaged by law enforcement or if such an engagement awaits the completion of their software. We are not privy to whether other evidence, security footage, digital forensics, financial records, or eyewitness testimony has propelled the investigation forward along entirely different avenues. Yet, what we can observe analytically is that the very specificity of CeCe Moore's comments is, in itself, highly informative. She avoided speaking in vague terms about the general state of forensic genomics. She spoke directly about this case. She identified the precise technical hurdle. She named the specific company engaged in overcoming it. This degree of detail, shared in a public space concerning an active federal case, does not emerge by chance. CeCe Moore is a consummate professional, possessing a profound grasp of the legal and investigative environments in which she functions. The information she elected to release publicly about this case reflects a deliberate choice about what to introduce into the public discourse. There is also the significance of what she left unsaid. She never stated the case was at a standstill. She did not suggest investigators had reached a dead end. She did not describe the DNA evidence as unusable or the investigation as having been deprioritized. Every facet of her public statement pointed to a particular problem for which a particular solution was in active development. This framing, that of a solvable challenge, not an insurmountable wall, is profoundly meaningful, coming from an individual with her level of experience and authority in this domain. One way to interpret that decision is that she is maintaining public focus on a case where such attention is critical. An alternate interpretation is that she is creating a public benchmark of the investigation's technical status at this specific juncture. Both of these interpretations are compatible with the observable facts and do not compel us to speculate beyond her actual words. Weaving the investigative threads together. For those who have been tracking this case since February, this new information aligns with narrative threads we have been following across several reports. The DNA evidence recovered from the Guthrie residence has, from the investigation's earliest days, been a pivotal component of public reporting. Certain locations within the residence were flagged by forensics as holding critical importance. Genetic material was indeed recovered. Yet, What followed that discovery has remained a persistent void in the public narrative. The central question lingered: what secrets did that evidence truly hold once it was processed in the lab? And why has the trail of genetic evidence seemingly gone cold, with no official word on any advancement? This chasm of information, the silence stretching from the moment DNA was collected to the present day, represents one of the most profound mysteries in the official timeline of this case. An interview with C.C. Moore, however, now offers a stark, technical explanation for that silence. The genetic material was secured. It was analyzed. But it exists as an intricate composite, a mixture so complex that today's forensic technology is incapable of isolating a profile clear enough for genetic genealogy. This is not a failure on the part of the investigators. It is the absolute frontier of forensic science, confronting a limitation, a puzzle that has yet to be solved on the necessary scale. This technological wall also helps explain the FBI's deliberate quiet on several other aspects of this case, such as the mystery of the second camera's footage. It contextualizes the sustained lack of public statements regarding any evidentiary breakthroughs. It aligns with a familiar pattern: federal agents remaining present but publicly silent in complex cases where DNA evidence proves, for now, technologically insurmountable. Authorities have compelling strategic reasons to keep their public communications to a minimum. In the world of complex investigations, silence is not synonymous with inaction. Often, it is a calculated strategy. If the specific technological hurdle is known, and if a solution is already being engineered, then the most prudent course is to reveal nothing that might alert a person of interest that authorities are simply waiting for a new capability to come online. The timeline from the pacemaker data, the disconnected doorbell camera, the investigation into contractors, the theory of a staged back door, the vacant adjacent property, all of these avenues of inquiry remain very much alive. Each one holds its own significance, separate from the genetic trail. An inquiry of this magnitude never hinges on a solitary piece of evidence, but the path of genetic genealogy, should it ever become navigable, promises potentially the most direct route to an identification. A direct genetic line from crime scene to identity, searchable against 50 million profiles, guided by the skill of the country's most accomplished genetic genealogists. That is not a lead investigators abandon. It is a lead they shield and preserve until the science is finally ready for its use. And right now, that technology may be on the verge of readiness. This brings us to the privacy debate, a conversation inextricably linked to the use of genetic genealogy in police work. To ignore this complex issue would be to tell an incomplete and dishonest story. The genetic databases used by consumers were never intended to be a tool for law enforcement. They were created for personal discovery, for individuals mapping their ancestry, finding lost relatives, or understanding their own health predispositions. When a person submitted their DNA to a service like Ancestry or 23andMe, they were consciously entrusting their genetic code to a corporation for deeply personal reasons. The notion that this private upload could one day become instrumental in identifying a family member, perhaps a person they have never even met as a suspect in a criminal case, represents a profound shift from the original implicit agreement. The ethical and legal firestorm surrounding this reality is both potent and far from over. Following the resolution of the Golden State Killer case, GED Match, the database central to that investigation, fundamentally altered its terms of service. Now, for law enforcement to upload a profile, the account owner must have explicitly opted in, granting permission for their data to be used in such searches. This was a direct response to public privacy concerns. While it shrinks the pool of searchable DNA, it preserves a framework of informed consent. The major players, Ancestry and 23andMe, have adopted a different stance. Both corporations have publicly declared that they will not voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. They require a legally binding order. A warrant, however, changes everything. A company's privacy policy holds no power against a federal court order. C.C. Moore has confirmed that the FBI can, and does, serve warrants on these companies through established legal channels. When served, the companies must comply. The data then becomes accessible. The ongoing bankruptcy proceedings of 23andMe introduce a new, troubling dimension that has captured the attention of legal scholars and privacy advocates. In a bankruptcy, a company's data, including millions of genetic profiles, is reclassified as an asset, one that can be acquired by a new owner. Petitions have been filed with the court supervising the 23andMe case, urging it to enforce strict protections on how this sensitive data can be transferred and ultimately utilized. The final judgment in these proceedings will undoubtedly define the landscape of consumer genetic privacy for many years to come. Yet, none of this alters the fundamental technical reality confronting investigators in this case today. The question of legal access to these databases is, for now, a secondary concern, because the very profile needed to conduct a search does not yet exist in a usable form. Yet, the debate over privacy is not an aside to this narrative. It is intrinsically woven into its very fabric. The very same technology holding the potential to unmask those responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is precisely what exposes the relatives of every consumer DNA customer to law enforcement scrutiny. These two realities exist in a delicate, simultaneous balance. Consider CeCe Moore's choice of platform, TMZ, one of the most trafficked hubs for entertainment and celebrity news on the planet. She did not select a forensic science journal, nor did she choose a publication geared toward law enforcement. Her message was not delivered at an academic conference. This decision, in itself, warrants a closer examination. The intense public fascination with the Nancy Guthrie case stems directly from its connection to a well-known television personality. Consequently, the audience captivated by this story overlaps significantly with the demographic that TMZ commands. Moore's decision to engage that specific venue, coupled with her level of technical detail, points to a calculated awareness of her audience and the precise message she intended for them to grasp. She could have spoken in broad, general terms. She might have merely confirmed her team's involvement while refusing to elaborate, or simply stated that the investigation was active and deferred all inquiries to the FBI. Instead, she articulated the specific technical hurdle with remarkable precision. She identified the companies striving to overcome it. She even provided a timeline weeks for what an identification might entail once that barrier was removed. This was a public statement of an entirely different nature than a standard, polite, no comment. A discernible pattern exists in the way seasoned forensic professionals discuss active investigations in a public forum. When they choose to be specific, volunteering details that go far beyond a simple confirmation of their role, there is almost always a purpose. At times, the objective is to sustain public pressure on a case that desperately requires it. On other occasions, it is about establishing a public, time-stamped record of an investigation's status at a critical juncture. And sometimes, the goal is to send an indirect message to parties holding crucial knowledge, to investigators in nearby jurisdictions, or to the public at large, that the pathway to identification is not merely theoretical. It is tangible, it is within reach, and it is being pursued with vigor. It is impossible for us to know which of these motives, or perhaps a combination of all of them, compelled Moore's public remarks. What we can observe, however, is that she revealed more than was necessary, and her words were surgically precise. The databases, the legal framework, the mixture complication, the company, the timeline. Every one of these elements was a calculated disclosure. Within an active federal investigation, decisions regarding public statements, what to say and where to say it, are meticulously weighed by individuals who fully grasp the stakes involved. The very precision of her language was, in fact, the message itself. Nancy Guthrie vanished in February of 2026. She is 84 years old. She is a mother. Her absence has created a void felt not only by her immediate family, but by the millions who have tracked this story for months across countless platforms. The unique character of this case, the family's public profile, the unsettling circumstances of the disappearance, and the questions that continue to linger, combined with the way law enforcement engaged and then fell silent, have produced a rare phenomenon in true crime coverage, a sustained, multi-month, multi-platform investigative community that is profoundly engaged, meticulously tracking every detail, recalling statements made 3 months prior, and scrutinizing them against new information, holding all inconsistencies up to the light, and in doing so, constructing a collective understanding of the case far more comprehensive than any single journalist or commentator could achieve alone. This level of sustained public focus is an anomaly, and its impact resonates far beyond the confines of a comment section. When investigators are acutely aware that millions of eyes are on a case, when their every public utterance is placed under a microscope, and when each and every inconsistency is being methodically cataloged, And when this community becomes large and engaged enough to exert genuine reputational and institutional pressure on those tasked with delivering answers, the very dynamics of the investigation begin to shift. Accountability transforms from an abstract concept into something tangible. The professional cost of deprioritizing the case escalates. The pressure to commit resources remains high, resisting the erosion of time. Historically, missing persons cases often recede from the public consciousness after the initial flurry of media attention. But the cases that remain in the spotlight demonstrably have better outcomes. This link between sustained public pressure and investigative success is not merely anecdotal. It has been documented across decades of such cases. This community is a vital component of that pressure, the people engaging in these discussions, following every turn, and disseminating information across multiple platforms. This is not simply background noise. It is a critical variable that investigators must factor into their strategy. It is the force that keeps Nancy Guthrie's name on the desks of those with the power to find her. The avenue of genetic genealogy is but one thread in this complex web. It is potentially the most powerful thread of all, provided the technological gap can be bridged. But it is not the only one. The investigation splinters, proceeding down multiple avenues at once, and the role of this community is to continue pressing for answers, to keep scrutinizing the public record, and to maintain relentless pressure on the officials and institutions tasked with providing the truth. The path forward, particularly regarding the DSC initiative, is contingent upon developments we are actively monitoring. Are there any updates on the progress of Estra's software? Has there been any discernible shift in the FBI's public stance on this investigation? Is there any signal from federal or county investigators that the processing of evidence has entered a new stage? What of the data situation with 23andMe? Have there been any changes that might alter what law enforcement is permitted to access? We will be here for every development, watching for anything that could reframe the entire picture, because complex cases are seldom unlocked by a single thread. There are other threads in this case. From the beginning, there have always been other threads. The DNA is the strand we have isolated today, brought into sharp focus by C.C. Moore, who offered us a specific, detailed, and profound glimpse into its exact status. That window has been opened. The technology is being forged. The timeline, should Moore be correct, and her record suggests she is, could be a matter of weeks after the capability becomes operational. We are watching. One final point is worth considering before we conclude. Cases like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie test every system they touch. They challenge law enforcement investigators who operate with incomplete evidence at the very frontier of forensic technology. They challenge journalists and analysts who must report accurately in real time without moving beyond what is truly known. And they challenge communities like this one, tasked with holding the case in public view while resisting the urge to turn speculation into accusation. The interview with C.C. Moore serves as a model for how a person, at the heart of this investigation, has elected to manage that immense pressure, by being precise about what is known and unknown, by candidly naming obstacles, and by pointing towards solutions without overstating timelines. That is the standard to which we hold ourselves. We track only what is verified. We label what is analytical. We separate what C.C. Moore stated from our own observations on the significance of her statements. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found. Her family is owed real answers, and this community is an essential force, ensuring that the pressure for those answers never fades. This report concerns an active federal investigation into a missing person. All information presented as established fact has been sourced from named, on-record contacts or verified mainstream reporting and is labeled as such. Claims that originate from a single source are clearly attributed to that source. Analytical conclusions, including our interpretations of publicly available information, are clearly identified as analysis, not as established fact. No person has been identified, named, or implied as a suspect in this report. Nothing within this presentation constitutes a legal accusation against any individual, named or unnamed. If you possess information pertinent to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, you are urged to contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line or the FBI's Tucson field office directly. Links to official points of contact are available in the description of this video. For official, up-to-date information regarding this investigation, please refer to the Pima County Sheriff's Department and formal public statements issued by the FBI.